Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm so excited to welcome you to this plenary session for the ASLE 2021 online conference. My name is Priscilla Solis Ibarra. I'm speaking to you from the ancestral Ho-Chunk lands in what is known today as Madison, Wisconsin. I'm based in Wichita and Caddo affiliated tribe lands at the University of North Texas. What we're going to do today is give you a tour and interview, Q&A opportunity with these exciting representatives from the project Mapping Migraciones. We'll do land acknowledgements, introductions, a brief tour of the website. What this is, Mapping Migraciones, a collaboration between California Audubon and Latino Outdoors to document oral histories and migrant stories. So there's a website, and I'm excited about this because we can use it in our classrooms and for research. So we'll get a brief tour from our guests, Pedro and Tania. Then Sarah Wald and I will ask a couple of questions as moderators, and then we'll moderate audience Q&A. So you'll get a chance to ask some of your questions. Let's get going with the first land acknowledgement. Sarah, if you'd like to get started.
It's an honor to be here with each of you. The land acknowledgements that are opening this plenary offer a way of placing ourselves in this moment, of making place present, of recognizing the lands from which we speak and the people of those lands. We want to ground our discussion of migration and the Mapping Migraciones project in our recognition that first and foremost, we are on Indigenous lands. And I'm speaking to you today from the traditional homelands of the Cowlitz people in what is referred to as Vancouver, Washington State. Pedro, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Pedro Hernandez. First of all, thank you all for taking the time to listening to me probably say some goofy things for the remainder of the hour, but I'm calling in from unceded Yoka territory, what's called Fresno, California, based in the broader San Joaquin Valley and in Central California as well too. So thank you all for having me, and you know, I'm really honored for even being offered the space to help celebrate you know, this project and the beautiful brown people we want to highlight as well.
Awesome, and I'm assuming you would like for me to go next. So hi everyone, my name is Tania. I am here on Tonga territory, also known as Los Angeles, California. And I'm excited to be able to share space with you and, like Pedro, be given the opportunity to be able to chat a little bit of like a project that's very dear to my heart and something that I find extremely important, specifically within the conservation community. So excited to be able to share soon.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, everyone. The moderators will introduce each other, and then we'll introduce our guests. Sarah Wald is Associate Professor of Environmental Studies and English and affiliated graduate faculty in Indigenous, Race, and Ethnic Studies at the University of Oregon. She is author of The Nature of California, Race, Citizenship, and Farming Since the Dust Bowl, and co-editor, I'm honored to say I'm a part of that project with her. It was a great collaboration, co-editor of Latinx Environmentalisms, Justice, Place, and the Decolonial. She has published and has forthcoming a range of articles in the environmental humanities in relation to food justice, transportation justice, Asian American studies, and Latinx studies. She's currently writing a book about storytelling and the outdoor equity movement. And I'm always honored to share space with my colleague, Sarah.
I am going to introduce Priscilla, who is just an honor to be here with her as well as everyone else. Priscilla Solis Ibarra is Associate Professor in the Department of English at the University of North Texas. She is author of Writing the Good Life, Mexican American Literature and the Environment, and another wonderful co-editor of Latinx Environmentalism's Place and the Colonial. In 2020, she was appointed to the editorial advisory board for the journal ASLE, and during this coming year, 2021-2022, she will be the Clement Senior Fellow at SMU's Clement Center for the Southwest Studies. She has essays forthcoming in the edited collection, First and Wildest, the Wilderness at 100, titled The Idea of Wilderness to Mexican Americans, and in the ASAP Journals Forum on Becoming Undisciplined with an article titled Burn It All Down.
Thank you, Sarah. And I will introduce Tania. Tania Romero was born and raised in the concrete jungles of South Los Angeles, California. Growing in an urban environment, she believed Los Angeles did not have any nature or wildlife. She now knows nature can be found everywhere, even in urban settings. She is passionate about birds, providing nature connections to urban communities, and social justice in the conservation field. Tania received a bachelor's degree in 2016 from the University of California, San Diego in biology and a double minor in environmental studies and ethnic studies. Her early career has consisted of mostly field work ranging from point count surveys, bird banding, nest monitoring in the Los Angeles area, Oregon forests, and Costa Rica. She also has experience in habitat restoration, environmental education, and youth engagement. She currently works as a program coordinator at the Audubon Center at Debs Park, managing the native plant nursery, community science projects, and the Mapping Migraciones project. She recently also co-established the Bear Divide Banding Station in the Angeles National Forest. And I'm very honored to welcome her to join us here at ASLE. Thank you, Tania, for being here.
It is my honor to introduce Pedro Hernandez. Pedro is Audubon California's Climate Policies Engagement Program Manager. He leads the organization's local, state, and federal climate advocacy. He brings years of experience working with multiple environmental organizations based in the San Joaquin Valley, advocating on issues like accessible drinking water, air quality, habitat restoration, and protection of public lands. And prior to his career in the nonprofit sector, Pedro worked as the chair of the history department at his alma mater, and he's worked for many years in the educational sector with rural communities. He received his bachelor's degree with honors in the United States and Latin American history from UC Berkeley. It's welcome, Pedro, to our ASLE plenary.
So now Tania and Pedro will give us a tour of the Mapping Migraciones site. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Priscilla and Sarah, for all the introductions. Really an honor to be here and share space with all of y'all, and really appreciate the time. The time y'all are here spending to be able to learn a little bit more about this project. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick intro along with my colega Pedro on this project. So foremost, to be able to really understand the Mapping Migraciones, we do have a landing page called audubon.org/Mapping Migraciones, which is what I'm showcasing now. Now, this project was really born through a collaboration of different Audubon colleagues within Audubon California and National Audubon Society, but also another nonprofit of Latino outdoors. So we all came together with this vision of being able to celebrate the concept of Latinidad and stories that connect across the Americas. Now, oftentimes when we think about migration, right, and we think about it within a conservation lens, we think a lot about the birds, the butterflies, right, the salmon, and oftentimes people are in awe of like, wow, these animals trek these long distances, right? But when you assign that paradigm or you think of migration through a people lens, that's not often what we think about, right? And I mean, we can go on politically, right, on even the current social dynamics that took place last year when it came to like the caravanas, right? Or when it came to different migrant communities during the 2016 to 2020 era. So this project was really meant to chip a little bit of that iceberg and start having these conversations of why aren't we celebrating people migration and the stories that encompass that. So this project is being able to deconstruct it within 2 ways. One of them is through the creation of the map that Pedro will be talking about soon. And the second portion of that are webinars. So like mentioned, this project is a 2-parter, the map and the webinars. Now, the webinars allow us to have a more deeper dive into some of these conversations. So some of the things that we've been discussing a lot within these webinars is being able to deconstruct a lot of the social issues or the isms, as we call it, within a conservation lens, specifically within the Latinx community. So a couple of examples of the things that we've had are conversations of anti-Blackness or colorism within our own communities, conversations of gender roles within our communities. What does it mean like for a female, right? Or someone that identifies as a woman to be able to navigate the conservation field. We've had conversations of what does it mean to navigate nature within a border town or community. You know, so a lot of that is a lot of the webinars are meant to bridge some of these social justice conversations along with conservation lens, which has been really inspiring to see. And you can see them all on this page. You can either register for the upcoming webinar that's going to be uploaded soon, or if you want to go ahead and see past webinars, we have our recordings here as well that you can definitely check out. So like mentioned, that is that's just one part of this project. The second part is the map. And the map, I'm going to go ahead and transition to Pedro to chat a little bit more about.
Sure. Thanks, Tania. And so, yeah, I mean, first of all, I just maybe want to start off with a little bit of my personal involvement in this project. You know, with my history degree, actually, my field of specialization was borderlands history. So the establishment, creation, alterations of natural and political borders. And so this is a project that, in a way, is a continuation of my own personal interests, but also a way of really just showing how, like, history within this hemisphere and within this continent has always involved migration. You know, and so I think this is something that's, for me, is kind of tapping into my kind of personal history, but the more broader, like, natural history of this hemisphere. And so these maps are amazing visualizations just to help kind of thread that needle a little more closely. And so, you know, once you're all able to, you know, play around on this map, you know, maybe after or during this webinar, you'll be able to see on the right-hand side, we pair, you know, people's migration stories with like actual like scientific information around like bird migration patterns and, you know, some other aspects about their life as well too. You know, I feel often the lack of connection between the natural world and, you know, human migration, that we're also part of the natural world, is just the lack of familiarity, whether it's like inadequate like schooling resources or other kind of barriers that prevent you know, our community and other people from being able to make these connections. And so you'll not only be able to like learn some of the like most up-to-date like science with bird migration, we're also going to be paired with some very concise you know, stories of people's different migration stories. And this is from the broader public, definitely within the Audubon network as well too. But it's also like a celebration because, you know, historically, right, the education system has been used as a tool of oppression against our community. And so I view this also as another like resource where we can own like our own voices, where we own the methods that it's being like circulated in, and we also like have control over like the way we honor all these stories as well too. And so you'll be able to see different stories from different Latin American countries. Our goal is to highlight as many Latin American countries as possible. So if there's anyone who's interested in, submitting a story or submitting content or kind of sharing this within your own networks too, we definitely want to crowdsource this as much as possible, because we don't want to like gatekeep, definitely. But also we want to make sure that we're making it as easy as possible for people's like stories to be celebrated in a country that otherwise would demonize these stories as well too. And so definitely encourage everyone to tap into your like playfulness and curiosity with this tool. And the good thing is that these will be housed kind of indefinitely. So this can be a resource for oral history. This can be a resource for other like geographical studies and other like natural explorations as well too. So we hope that this can be something again that can lend itself to wherever people are at on their personal journeys or like academic and professional journeys as well too. So yeah, I think in the interest of time, I'll maybe pause there. Unless Tania, you have anything else to add to this?
Yeah, thanks, Pedro, for all of that. Really appreciate it. I just wanted to go over a couple of really quick buttons and how to be able to access all the information, just because the ArcGIS platform can be a little weird sometimes. So like Pedro mentioned, right, we have paired a bird's migration journey and a person's migration journey. And all those personal stories are going to be housed under this left-hand side column that I'm circling right now with my cursor, right? And all that is attached by a country. So if I want to click, let's say Argentina, right? I click it, I will be able to showcase only that migration route, right? So you can really see that Argentina to, I think this is LA endpoint. You'll see here within this tab, you have the learn about a bird cursor, and that's really going to establish a lot of like the science information that Pedro was talking about when it comes to these birds, from migration route to breeding grounds to when do they migrate and things like that. This right-hand side thing on Read Someone's Story is the actual nitty oral history that was collected from the public. And some of it's going to be in Spanish, some of it's going to be in English. It all wavers and it all depends. And realistically, it's whatever these individuals feel comfortable sharing. So yeah, like Pedro mentioned, I highly encourage folks to toggle and play with them. There are a lot of very cool stories, and something very nice about this project that we've gotten feedback on is just this concept of like, wow, I didn't even ever hear my own story, or this has allowed me to reconnect with my own grandparents or my own parents, because maybe not that we didn't care, right? But maybe we never really took the time or had the courage or felt that these are questions that we can ask, right? I know oftentimes I feel that with my grandma, like, why would I want to ask her about an experience that can maybe be traumatic, right? But at the same time, folks had given the feedback of, it's just been a very beautiful and nice experience. And this survey that was meant to take only, in our heads, a couple 20-30 minutes, people have expressed that actually sometimes takes me 2 to 3 hours because I realize I don't know all the answers. So with that said, I want to go ahead and just show you real quick that survey and how to access it. So like mentioned, all of it can be accessed through our Audubon Mapping Migraciones, and all the way in the bottom, it has, tell us your story, tell us your migration path. That will be a pop-up that we have here. And this is our format survey. Now, we don't take any information that's like considered sensitive, like a birthday, social security, anything like that. You can decide to use whatever name you want if you're not even comfortable using your own name, and you can share as much or as little as you want. Some of these are very open-ended. So we encourage everyone to let us help us in this way, being able to capture a little bit of our oral history that's, often neglected, often not talked about, and honestly, often not valued either. So if y'all have any stories to share, with that, I'll go ahead and stop my share, and we'll go ahead and transition to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Tania and Pedro, for sharing the site itself and giving us some ideas about how we can navigate it. And I also invite all my colleagues to consider this as a resource for our classrooms, as ways to invite our students to document their stories, or certainly to learn about all of the stories that are already on the site. This is such a, well, what we're going to do right now is Sarah and I are going to ask a couple of questions, but all of you will have an opportunity to ask questions too. So if you want to start thinking about that and putting them in the Q&A in the chat, and then Sarah and I will look through and get as many of those questions to Pedro and Tania as we can too. But the first question I just want to open the Q&A section of this webinar with is just to say, you know, this is such a creative and dynamic project that documents oral histories for the community and connects them to the practice of natural history and brings attention to the constructed nature of political boundaries. So could you tell us something about the roots of the project, what helped it to become such a dynamic project? Or on the other side of that coin, maybe, you know, what are some of the most exciting recent developments, unexpected developments from the project? But, you know, I'm really interested in kind of the beginnings and then maybe what you're learning the most from it at this point. And it's an ongoing project too, right? So whoever wants to start on that, I'm happy to, love to hear those stories.
I can start with it, Pedro, if you don't mind.
Yeah, this is all you.
All right, thanks. So the way I like to describe this project, it was very organic. I think, you know, working within the conservation platform for some time, it was just, it happened a lot at Debs Park, the center where I'm at, literally between myself and another colega, Estefania, that's also a lead of this project. And then originally, this was actually a physical map that we just created for an engagement tool for our Pachanga event, which was a big celebration we did here for September for Latinx Heritage Month. So it was meant to be just a station with the map pieces. That's kind of how the concept was born. But it was meant to be just a standalone like station thing for that day as an outreach tool. From there, you know, when COVID hit, there was a lot of like more online engagement throughout the whole network, and casually ourselves, but also our boss, the director here at Debs Park, just started chatting about it to folks, just as like, oh yeah, that was like a really cool thing of the event, blah, blah, blah. And then organically, people were just kind of like, well, let us hear more. So it was very grassroots like sometimes, like it was very like, oh, let me know more about it. And it came to a point where it was a constant conversation. It was just like a natural fit to like, why don't we take this to an online platform? Because it's also COVID. So a lot of our job cards were shifted a lot. Like there's a lot of community engagement we couldn't do. So it became a very project of like, well, that sounds cool. It seems feasible to do it online. So why not do it? And we did a pretty broad call out, and there was a couple of us, I want to say 10 to 15 of us that were very on board of like, oh, that would be awesome. Like, yeah, that definitely ties in the oral stories we constantly tell our own colegas here at Audubon, and we're sharing like with each other all the time. We're having these conversations naturally, but it also connects to the broader scale of what the current political climate was at that time. So it was really meant to be able to branch out like that. Now, there's a lot of cool things throughout the project that have happened. The project has received a lot of support, like not in the sense of like funds or monetary, because we're all volunteer based right now, working on this project, but in the sense of like support of like how much this work is really needed. Like we've had so much publicity that I mean, we can't even account for. I know out of nowhere on a weekend, this project was on the LA Times, like on the LA Weekly stuff. Then Esri, you know,
Ah, sí, Maniel,
GIS
kata
platform we
dulu,
use. Esri, the platform that we use, this ArcGIS, the platform we use for the map, highlighted it on its landing page, highlighted it on its homepage of like some of the cool projects you could do at Esri. So yeah, we've been receiving that type of support left and right, which I think really showcases how much people want these projects, but how much they're also needed throughout the world. So I think that's a little bit of the highlights I have in this origin of the project. Pedro, I don't know if you would like to add anything else.
Oh, yeah, I'll add my 2 little cents. Yeah, I mean, definitely, yeah, shout out to Tania and the crew at Debs Park for, you know, creating the space. I think like something maybe that Tania's being a little humble about is that the Debs Park Center in LA is definitely at the forefront of, you know, Audubon's conservation work with like community engagement and like meaningful like cultural like competence for the community that, you know, the center is located in as well too. So I think, you know, this is maybe one fruit of that larger tree that they've been cultivating for a good while now. I guess where I come in on this is definitely, I think, I remember kind of some of the earlier conversations, and we wanted this to at least be like a year-long project. We didn't want it to be like a one-off, like one webinar, or just like a week-long thing, because we wanted to like, you know, celebrate the depth and like complexity and like the time that it actually takes to like to have these conversations internally, but also just more broadly like create this like high-quality content like out as well too. So I think like just that in itself too, like the duration and just how we designed it as well too. We didn't want to be like tokenized, and definitely we wanted to be at the forefront of a lot of the important decision making. I think also, you know, this project is like really important in the conservation world more broadly, and I think like as like Latinx conservationists, there's definitely like a sense of like white dominance, white narrative dominance in like the natural world as kind of in the mainstream conservation organization. I mean, Audubon, like the name Audubon, right? Like this guy was a slave owner who happened to like birds, you know? So like on one hand, John James Audubon was like really important for like the advancement, I guess, of like Western ornithology in the Americas. But on the other hand, right, like stole a lot of like indigenous knowledge, like also like was very active in like oppressing other like marginal communities as well too. And so I think this is a way for us to like own the space that has been like historically denied to us as well too in this conservation movement, but even within our organization. So I view it as a very like intentional political stance to own space and like create all this like dope content, you know, in an organization that, you know, historically has not met the needs of like our community as well too. And so I do think this is us doing 2 birds with 1 scone. That's hip way to say it nowadays. But I do think this is a way for us to like celebrate ourselves, like own a lot of space, but also kind of step into that like into like our like inheritance as well too of like people who are like are indigenous to this hemisphere, and also just, you know, protecting the environment that our ancestors have been tied to for so long, you know. So this is not us being displaced by anyone anymore. This is us like owning up space and, you know, being very awesome advocates, program leads, and, you know, we want to celebrate the communities we come from. Like I feel like I didn't want to choose between my different identities when I took the job at Audubon, right? I didn't want to just only work on birds right? I didn't want to like erase that like other identity that I had as well too. So this is a way where like I don't have to choose. And honestly, this makes me way happier and like, and this is like our connection with the community, right? This is something that can't be replicated with a biology degree, or this is something that can't be replicated with like any degree of like privilege as well too. So this is us like tapping into all that, and just strutting and like working it and, you know, celebrating ourselves and our community too. So I think like even just us owning that narrative has been really important, even just as a personal reward for us.
Great, thank you so much. Sarah, I think you have a question.
Yes, I'm loving this conversation. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little more about the practice of oral history as you used it, and how the practice of oral history, the impact it had on the participants that are contributing their stories or having their stories contributed by others.
Tania, do you want to go, or like I can go first and then like we rotate this time?
Yeah, how about you go and then I go?
Okay. Yeah, so from my side of things, you know, I have a degree in history, and you know, oral history has been used and definitely like increased in practice over the years as like a direct way to challenge like other like mainstream like narratives that have been cultivated by institutions or by other movements, or just like other like interest groups as well too. So I do think oral history as a practice, when acted upon like intentionally, can be like a direct act of like resistance and honoring people's voices as well too. So actually, one second, I have a cool book. Yeah, so there's a, yeah, I know, right? So I have this book, it's called My History, Not Yours. And it was a like overview of kind of how Mexican-American voices were like interviewed, but then consequently like censored in the ways like they were represented as well too. So I feel when filtered through the lens of like white supremacy or like self-interest or X, Y, other Z, like other interests, oral histories can be really like manipulative or exploitative as well too. And so I think it's important for us to really honor like the voices that like people are submitting as well too. And I think like, I mean, honestly, I would like each person to have like full 5 hours of the story, right? Like realistically, like because of like technological limitations, we do have to like, you know, trim stuff back, or at least, you know, only ask 5 questions when you really want to ask like 500, right? But in a way, like I still think it's a way for us to exercise like discretion in not censoring people's voices. And so I just think like, I mean, that's been something that's been happening so long in our community, right? And then this is one of the many things we can do to stop some of those cycles. But you know, just even in my own experience with this project, oral history is a way just to like ask those questions, right? Tania mentioned it earlier, right? Of like asking those questions maybe you were always curious in asking, or you know, you have like an elder in the family too that, you know, you've always been like wanting to ask, but like finally get the courage to, or you finally feel safe enough or bold enough. And so I think like it's like there's many dualities, right? Where it's like stopping cycles against like historical censorship, but also a way for us to like develop like and strengthen meaningful connections within our own community too. And like my father passed away when I was 15, and so like there was a lot of questions that like I had to ask that like I can't ask anymore. And so like in a way too, this is a cool project for me to like help like facilitate some of those other discussions like within families as well too. So yeah, I think it's yeah, I'm checking off a lot of boxes in this project, and you know, I can't say that I have that connection to other like policy work or other stuff that I'm doing as well too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pedro. Yeah, totally agree with a lot of what Pedro mentioned, or all of what Pedro mentioned. And really, the heart of it, right, and the importance of oral history, and I don't think we can reiterate that as much, right? I think something that was at the forefront of this is even trying to decolonize or deconstruct, right, what data is valid. And I think oftentimes that's another thing with oral stories is that, you know, specifically when you look at the science community, I mean, I as a scientist and biologist, I get told all the time, like, well, the data doesn't say that. And I'm like, but I saw that. You know, like I saw that, you know, XY birds are flying through, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, scientifically that doesn't sound right, but I saw that, you know, and I think that's also taken within the science, within the social sciences, a lot more accepted, right? But within the science community, is like they're so big on data, like how do you conceptualize it, and is it valid? And half of the time it isn't. So I think it's important to also deconstruct that mindset and that thinking and being able to mesh two worlds, right? To really create something powerful, which I think is it's the very beauty of that. I think in regards to like it being the impact of it within our own communities is that oftentimes through this narrative, right, of what's valid, what's not valid, what should you do, what should you not do, right? Or even our education system, when you write arguments, right? We're told not to look into this sometimes, but the power it has and the acknowledgement that we are a community built on oral history and traditions. And yeah, it's not, maybe it's not documented anywhere. You're not going to be able to get a history textbook on how to ask your grandma these questions, right? Or how to even like start these stories, right? But that doesn't mean they're invalid and that our culture is not established onto a well-documented system, right? It's just being able to construct that further. And I think going back to what a couple of things I said earlier is, to me, it's very astonishing that I think this is my own thought process, that specifically I, as also a first-gen student in this country, right, I have forgotten that sometimes. I've forgotten the power to be able to sit down sometimes with my own parents and grandparents and ask them directly. Like, I'm learning it through textbooks, through, I mean, ethnic studies that I took. I learned a lot about the Bracero program and all these things. And sometimes I don't have those conversations enough with my own family, you know? So what is that saying for me, right? That's saying that there's an comfort, like Pedro mentioned, right? Maybe there's a fear, maybe there's, for whatever reason, that I have internalized, or maybe the system I grew up in taught me not to value that and not have those combos. And I think that's the beauty of this project, that people were sitting down intentionally now with their elders, whether it be parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, their theos, and asking, what is your story? You know, what do you feel comfortable sharing? They're realizing now, like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to condense it into these 300 words the survey is asking, you know? And it's like, we literally have just a small piece of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. Like, we're not even really capturing the in-depth that these oral stories can really provide. We're just capturing that really small piece, right? That could be condensed into the survey, whether it be because of the word limit, whether it be because of the language barrier, right? Whether it be because there's some truth or some stories that, for whatever reason, people will never feel comfortable ever documenting, right? Because a lot of this can also be traumatic. A lot of it can also be scary or very raw, right? So yeah, I think for me, this project has really been very powerful in that sense. That really just highlights the importance of being able to include a lot of these oral stories as valid data, but also as an important piece within even a science community.
Great, thank you so much.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing that I've really appreciated reading all those stories is the ways that they really seem to challenge a lot of dominant narratives, and particularly this emphasis on joy and celebration throughout the website, and the ways in which the stories, I mean, there's so many popular narratives, even in progressive circles of immigration, that are about suffering. And there's a real emphasis on pleasure and joy, both in migration and when people are describing their connections to nature and pleasure, that I think really run against so much of the stories we tell about people of color and the environment and about the migration experience.
Sorry, I want to add something to that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Tania.
And yes, I thank you so much for pointing that out, Sarah, because it's true. I think, oftentimes even myself, I have to deconstruct that, right? Of like, oh, I think a lot of suffering, because it's true. We learn a lot through this concept of migration, of like what the public depicts, right? And then I go ask my grandma, I asked her not that long ago. And my question was like, oh, like, why did you decide to migrate here? Like, what made you? And she gave me the most simple-handed response of like, I just wanted to come, and your dad wanted to come, so I just came. Like, it wasn't like a very elaborate story of like suffering or things like that. Not saying that she didn't, right? But it was a very simple, clear cut of like, what do you mean? I just wanted to come because your dad wanted to come. And like, I knew I just had to follow him. And yeah, I don't regret being here. I crossed that border X amount of times, and I would do it again, and it just showed to me a lot of like, man, you weren't even thinking about all these things probably, or maybe you were, but you just weren't fazed by it. So I think it also showed even the strength, right? In some of our own ancestors and elders of like, we're going after what we want. And then in retrospect, that puts me into like, why am I even scared of speaking up sometimes, right? When I had an ancestor that just decided to cross the border 5 times and really didn't think about, the possibilities, right?
Yeah, I mean, also on that point too, it's like, this is my dog buddy. He shows up on my meetings a lot. I think like, as far as like joy is concerned and everything too, like in academic circles, right, which is again like a venue where a lot of people learn about our issues. Like I feel like that in itself, like, I mean, some of us don't need to be reminded that like there's been half a millennia of colonization, right? But I think also it's just like, that's even that in itself is like placing a border like on our identity. And I like to say like all the time, like, even like for myself, like, yes, I do climate work, I do policy work, whatever, but like, I'm a musician, like I love dogs, like there's a lot of other like components to like our identities as well too, that are not just like being oppressed, right? The conditions of oppression have been contexts and like dynamics that have been placed onto us, not necessarily things like of our choosing. And even that framing really, like, I think robs us of a lot of like our autonomy, like our identity, and also like our own like individual like personalities, and the complexity of like Latinidad. And then also it's just like, yeah, like we've been through enough of suffering and like all that stuff. Like, honestly, do any of us need a reminder, right? And so like, again, like this is, and even for like allies and stuff too, right? Like people view us as like oppressed XYZ, like marginal people. But yeah, like we're deeper than that. Like our feelings are much more profound. And honestly, it's been like that joy, that is also like an act of resistance, right? And that joy that kind of refills our cup to like allow us to continue to survive in this oppressive fucking country, right? And like that in itself, like that joy and that love for the community, like that's been stronger than ultimately the attempts of genocide as well too, because we're still here, right? And so like that in itself, I think is something to really like elevate as well too. And like, honestly, I want to celebrate my mom. Like, ooh, I put her through a lot of things. She's gone through a lot of stuff too. Like, you know, and like, if this is one thing I can do, then, you know, it's at least one thing. So yeah, thanks for that question. That's a very, very great point to raise.
We're heading towards the conclusion of the session at noon. I want to combine one of the questions that came in through the Q&A with kind of the last moderator question. The last moderator question that we had was just about, you know, I get really excited speaking to Tania and Pedro, because I like to imagine that the students that come through my classroom will be going out and doing things in the world like Tania and Pedro are doing. So I wanted to ask you, you know, what are some of the things that you did in your classrooms? You know, we're talking to a lot of instructors here today, that you feel like prepared you for the kind of work that you're doing, or on the other side of that coin, because there's always another side to the coin. What are some things that you wish that you would have had an opportunity to do in some of your classrooms that could have helped you prepare for the kind of work that you're doing, so that we can imagine how to integrate things to help folks, you know, do the kind of work that you're doing. And then I'll combine that with one of the questions that came in through the chat, which is that, you know, someone, Tori was curious if there's a reading list that goes along with the Mapping Migraciones project. So I'm curious about that too. And if there happens not to be, maybe this is a good space for us to collaborate, you know, with ASLE folks who might have some good suggestions about some reading material that might help contextualize these stories for folks that are coming through and taking a look at the site. So thank you.
Yeah, I can start us off. So no, there's no reading list, unfortunately. I'll pin that now. Like I mentioned, the project is very volunteer based and we're already spread very thin. So there's a lot of components we have to let go. However, there's always possibility, right, of if we decide to keep this project within the Audubon space to always expand. So that can be something we can work on in the future, but as of now, we don't have one. And retrospect to the other question of, you know, what within a classroom setting, what has prepared me to be here, right? Or something I would have liked. I think I'm gonna go with something I would have liked. And I think specifically for the science departments. So I'm a hardcore biologist that at Debs Park, I've been allowed to mesh with a lot of the ethnic studies world, right? But I step into a lot of like hard science communities as well. Most of the time I'm one of the only Latinas, and most of the time when it's a like a conversation that has to do anything within the platform of DEI, it's a hot mess. You know, it's a very, very hot mess, for lack of better words, in the sense of all scales of representation, of like project management, like, you know, community engagement, like everywhere is a hot mess. And I think that captures a lot of what I struggled with. And it seems like not only what I struggle with, but everybody in this field is struggling with this concept of how to mesh two things together. I don't think the science community has figured that out. Right, and I think a lot of it's because of the disconnects that we have imposed, even within our thought of thinking of the social sciences versus the hard sciences. And we hear it a lot within academia, right? I was like, oh, you're a social science major. Oh, that's not real science. Or like, you know, you're a biology major. I was like, oh, like you probably have like a tough like workload, right? Or you're probably really smart, right? And I was like, no, like you have to have both in these fields. So I think we need to be able, as educators and teachers, be able to understand that mesh and be able to capture an intersectionality between them. Because realistically, right now where our science world is heading, like if we're just focusing on the hard data, we are going nowhere. Like a lot of this climate change in the future, like without being able to mix those two, we're in very deep trouble. And I think I would have loved to see that within my own classroom setting specifically, because for the longest time, I was told a lot, just do an ethics studies major, all your coursework is on that. Like you're not really cut off for the bio world. You know, you're not really gonna go where you wanna go with that. Like, you know, and for the longest time, I was always within this in-between state of, why do I care about wildlife and birds when there's so much like messed up things within our human world, such as like the sexism, right? The racism, the capitalism. Like why should I care about our wildlife when there's more pressing issues? So it took me a while to find that intersectionality. So I think that's something I would really push and would have loved to see to create biologists that are a lot more multifaceted than these like hard, like just take the data. If it's not bird related, it's irrelevant to you. No, everything's relevant to us. You know, so I would have loved to see that.
Yeah, and I'll just say, big fan of the reading list idea. Yeah, kind of called myself out just bringing a book up to share too. But yeah, I think that would definitely be interesting, and there's a lot of great content out there too that could support and reinforce more points of connection with the discussion. You know, so I think that's definitely something that I think would be interesting. As far as like things that like I did, I'm really happy I was a history major. Honestly, yeah, like in a way it was like a pushback against like, oh yeah, like not in the hard sciences, you know, like what is the social sciences like really got to bring to the table. But in a way, like my own like historical studies, like since like everything has a history, right? Like it's really flexible to learn about different things. So I was able to explore the natural world. I was able to explore, you know, like different like hemispheric views of history. I was able to like learn about like indigenous resistance and like Latin America's like history with social movements and revolution as well too. And in some of those ways, like it was very like identity affirming, where kind of transformed my own personal view of like being scared of being viewed as like this like angry brown man, or like, you know, versus like, oh, you know, actually like my ancestors have been doing this like for generations. And even that in itself was like very affirming. But I do think like there has to be like a meaningful reconciliation between like, in as far as the gaps between like hard sciences and social sciences. Because again, like something like climate change, which like I'm like, that's my specialty for my job. The climate crisis is inseparable from racial justice and environmental justice. And so like for what we do at Audubon, yes, we protect birds, but you know, a big part of my job and a niche that I've been really like carving out is like, how can we like use this bird advocacy? How can we use the fact that like birds are connected to different geographies and ecosystems, right? To leverage that like perspective and those resources to like enhance environmental quality for like the communities that they share, you know, with brown people. Or like, how can other efforts to like increase park access in like historically marginalized communities or, you know, kind of green deserts be leveraged to support like more interconnectivity with wildlife and biodiversity benefits, right? And so honestly, there like the conservation movement is like, there's a lot of like, I'm gonna call out names, but like there's a lot of prominent like specifically white led organizations and like white directors and, you know, that are scratching their heads of like, how do we protect both, right? And like I'm just seeing a lot of like, you know, very talented brown people, different phases in their careers, just like already have the answers. you know, and so I just think like really like supporting that synergy is really important. Like we've like our communities have had their own like cultures of like interrogation and studies, right? It's only through the filter of like white supremacy that kind of fostered this like division between like studying and like questioning and like record keeping with like that's been oppositional to like our culture and our identity. So I don't necessarily think there's like a natural division between science and like the interests of our community, right? Like if anything, like we can say like in some ways like science has helped like our parents who have been sick, or you know, all this other stuff, right? So there's been plenty of overlaps and benefits, but I think when it's filtered through the lens of white supremacy or like Eurocentrism, that's where the problem is. And I think like a lot of us can operate without those filters, and you know, that in itself, like that's where the conservation and environmental movement is moving. You know, it's expanding interconnectivity beyond just like food webs to like humans are a part of nature. Humans have always been a part of nature, and how can we modernize our policy and our institutions and our cultures too to like actually reflect that? How can we like modernize our economy to meet the needs of our ecosystem and our community, right? Not meet the needs of exploitive industries. And so I think we have a lot of answers to kind of, but we got to organize and, you know, own up that space that we deserve to own up as well.
Thank you so much, Pedro and Tania. I'm hoping everyone in the audience understands why Priscilla and I were so excited about the opportunity to bring both of you together and listen to you speak and converse, and why we just both gain so much every time we're here to talk. We have all these exciting questions we didn't get to because we're out of time. I'll just mark there was a really exciting conversation happening in the the chat about return, migratory birds return, and return as roots and remembering, and also some conversations about maps and why maps are a particularly important part of storytelling that I'm excited to think more about. And also that Priscilla is going to lead up the collaboration for the reading list that's developing in the chat. And so Priscilla put her email address in the chat, so anyone interested can go ahead and contact her. And I hope everyone joins me in thanking Pedro and Tania for sharing their time and their expertise with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.